Hey guys, welcome to a new episode of the Burning Questions series by Fantasy Football Scout. It is nice to be back after the international break. I hope everyone's been enjoying the break away from FPL. We have a few more days before the deadline rolls around, and I am joined today by my good friend Seb. We've done a couple of streams together over the years, and I always enjoy zooming with Seb. So it's really nice to have you back. How are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm good, thank you, my friend. I'm better after that intro. How very generous of you. Although I must say, I'm doing this. What is it like? Half two my time, half silly o'clock your time. I'm not a fan of being able to see the bags under my eyes. We had a plumber around at very early this morning after the toddler was up as well. So just off camera up here, I have a big hole in my roof. I'm slightly terrified something will fall on me, but it looks all right at the moment. Like we're in like a sort of new build from I don't know 5, 6 years ago, something like that. And you know how you walk around your house and you just assume it's fine. Then someone cuts a hole in your ceiling and you're like, oh my goodness, it's made out of like paper and hopes and dreams. I don't want to know this. Hide it away.
Yeah. So for those that might be confused as to what Seb is talking about, you pretty much had a hole in the top of your ceiling today, right? Just to get your bathroom fixed.
Yeah. So the room I'm in now is under the ensuite for our bedroom upstairs. And it was, the classic. I'm sure many people who have rented or owned a house are familiar with patches of water on ceilings. So a pipe was leaking under the shower. So we had to cut it from in this room, cut a big hole in the ceiling, which the toddler enjoyed. He keeps going, "Mummy, Daddy, bix the hole." And so there's a hole off camera to my left, which is slightly impending FPL metaphor there somewhere probably.
Anyway, so it is very nice to have you back. I think okay, so
Anyway.
I'm trying to get the volume correct. Looks
Oh,
like
okay.
yeah, we're actually struggling with it, which is why we're a little late. If you can bear with me.
Yeah, apologies, team. We were just trying to get this sorted beforehand.
Yeah.
I guess we don't stream often together, so you got to get those mics looking good together.
Yeah, it's actually because I have a new mic, and maybe that's the issue. Hopefully, this is okay. We'll try to adjust along the way. Today, so I think we're going to not discuss so much about Wildcard 10. I'm sure like content this week is a little iffy, Seb, because not many people are going to be pulling the trigger this game week. I do see some people pulling the trigger on a wildcard game week 9, but I don't see a reason why because the fixtures are so good for our teams themselves. But I think next week I'm going to discuss wildcard 10 more in depth with my friend Harry. And this week we're just going to sort of have a discussion and get the rust off and sort of get back into the rhythm of FPL. So I know you did Scoutcast last week, or yesterday, and I'm going to try to bounce off you a little bit and sort of get some new ideas from you. But we're going to go through the fixtures and then talk in depth about Man City, Arsenal, and Liverpool. And then we'll get to our bus teams at the end. So that's the agenda for today.
Lovely. Yeah, you can. I've had a warm up, so I can
Nice.
lead us into conversation about FPL. It's been a long. It feels like it's been a long time. Does it feel like that to you? The international break has been a long one.
It's really weird, especially with us doing podcasts, Seb. It's like 1 week off. It feels like a very long time off, if you know what I mean. And
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, and also like international break for me is always a good time for me to like watch the national team play because I just enjoy that so much. And I've been keeping a really close eye on Son the last 2 weeks. He did play 90 minutes just now, about 40 minutes ago, but I think there's something niggling in terms of injury as well because he was out of the training sessions. He didn't play the first international match, but the fact that Klinsmann played him in a 90-minute 5-6-0 game means I think he wants to get the rhythm under his belt, and hopefully that means he's definitely going to start this weekend. It's just a matter of whether he gets more minutes than 75 minutes, which is what he got right before the international break. So, the captaincy for him is going to be all on minutes for me. And I know you don't have Holland, so it's very interesting discussion that we're going to have. But before we get into the fixtures, you can't hear us, huh?
When you say you can't hear us, do you mean literally or just mic volume?
I don't
So
know. I
because
think
we
it's
can.
the volume adjustments that weird, but anyway.
Okay,
So
cool.
yeah, before we get into the fixtures, I'd first like to ask you, for those that might not be watching Scoutcast on a regular basis, Seb, sort of how your season's been going. I know you've had some really
Oh,
decent
sure.
seasons in the past 2, 3 years. So yeah, tell me about your season and what's been happening with your team.
Yeah, the last few seasons have been kinder to me so far than this season. Although, I mean, like your 620k I see on the screen here, which is basically the best rank I've seen so far, I think, with anyone I've chatted to. So, you're elite, my friend, which I think that goes to show as well, right? Like ranks all over the place at the moment, which can be indicative of a couple of things. Firstly, it's still only game week 8. 1 week ago, I was like 1.8 million or something. And the week before that, halfway through the week, I was
Yeah.
like 100k. I was like 500k, 100k, 1.8 million, now 900k, which I think just shows how very volatile our ranks are in response to the points scored. It's all still pretty close. And then I think the other factor is we chatted about this a lot last night, actually, like your Brunos, your Rashfords, players that were popular for a number of reasons who haven't necessarily delivered have been held quite heavily in a number of teams and probably very much like our teams. So people who are play FPL in a way that means you engage with FPL Twitter or that way of thinking, I think a lot of us saw Fernandes and Rashford as good value. So anyone that didn't, rightly or wrongly, are probably the ones occupying, the top 100k right now, while we warm the cheap seats back here. But I think it's still early enough in the season where I'd say I'm enjoying it, if that's the right word. I really like the first few weeks, and it's probably going to wear off really soon. In terms of it feels like rank doesn't matter too much, says the guy at 900k, great. But because it's not so much about can you crack top million, top 100k, top 10k in the first 5 weeks, it's more about how can we test our pre-season presumptions versus what we're now seeing in actual football. And it feels like the only time of the year where like FPL and real football analysis overlap importantly. Because by the time we get halfway through the season, we've got enough numbers, or you've got enough eye test behind you, whatever your preferred method is, to make decisions based on that. You don't necessarily need to analyze tactics. And also, tactics are established. Arteta, Pep Guardiola, whoever it is, are probably playing in the same way they have been doing, or they've established a new way of playing. Whereas in those first couple of weeks, it's really interesting to go, oh, Arsenal are building up differently because Partey's playing on the right or Gabriel isn't playing, Zinchenko's injured. They signed Kai Havertz. How does that change their team structure? And that is obviously directly relevant to then what our FPL assumptions are going to be and what our decisions are going to be on FPL. Whereas if that happens at Christmas, it's a lot harder to go, oh, a player is now overlapping on the left. So what does that mean? What it probably means is not nearly as much as we think it does because we have half a season's worth of data. Whereas at the beginning of the season, that stuff is so much more important. And I think all of us, people listening to a podcast at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon about FPL probably enjoy analysing football. And when FPL and that analysis overlap usefully is when I have the best time, at least me personally.
Amazing. I mean, so many questions to bounce off that, but so obviously you're mentioning that by the time we get to the halfway point, data obviously is very important, and we know what we know through the data. But you feel like this is about the time where data really influences a lot of your decisions, because there's also things like this, right? The data doesn't speak everything because we need to balance eye tests, football as well as data, but there's also teams with great fixtures from 1 through 8, and then their fixtures get really tough, so their data might be skewed, for example. So how is this the time where you really implement your decision making through data, would you say? Because I know you're a data driven guy, Seb.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think you've put it wonderfully there in terms of we need to be aware of sample sizes. And realistically, the real answer, if you asked an actual data scientist and you told them, I've got a 38, individual sample and I'm going to make some decisions, they'd laugh at you. They'd go, okay, times that by 10 and come back, please. But at that point, 10 years of football, all my FPL players have retired. So really, FPL is a game of making decisions on not enough information. And that information can come from anywhere. When I say data, obviously that gets very associated with numbers and a certain way of playing, using models, analyzing in a certain way, not necessarily watching football. But data is also just your collection of impressions from watching a match. You store those up in your own data bank in your head and you make decisions based on that. So a sample size applies to anything we talk about here. Watch one game of football, draw some conclusions, watch 10 more of the same team and your conclusions probably change quite a lot and you don't need to look at a single number. So I think we're in that period now where the new season are massively influenced by what you said, the difficulty of fixtures that people have had and players betting into teams, tactics settling in. It's very, very, very volatile.
Yeah.
That's where we maybe need to lean on last season.
Yeah.
Or not even last season, but players' statistics from other leagues or games we've watched in other leagues, which we know don't necessarily translate over one for one. So I think this is where if there's ever an edge to be gained by, I don't know, intuition, or something I can't put my finger on, and therefore I'll call it magic, but someone else might be able to analyze it perfectly. This is that time, right? When you get to game week 30,
Nice.
there's a lot less room for that because we have a lot more data available to us and a lot less time to play with it, as well.
Yeah, very, very interesting. You know what? On this topic, I'd like to express that, like, in the last 3 seasons, I've had pretty good finishes in terms of ranks, and I would like to say I've had good seasons. And I'm actually not so data driven, Seb. I don't think
Yeah.
I've ever been really data driven. I think sometimes I use it to sort of confirm my decision making skills. And the point I made about my ranks is to show that there's different ways to play this game. And I think I'm more of a feel manager in some ways. I'll try to
Hmm.
see openings where there's opportunities go different, but I also try to keep up with the pack in general, play sort of a patient, calm game, and understand that there's strategy involved in terms of effective ownership in this game as well, right? So, I hate it when someone says, "Why do you play this game? Why do you play template? This and that." I think everyone has their niches and sort of their differences throughout the season where they can attack fixtures or attack certain or gain rank through some players and stuff like that. So I think I'm a very different manager from you, but it's always good to hear different perspectives, I
See,
believe. And I'm very tactic driven, if you know what I mean.
yeah. Which, I mean, to be fair, that's the good bit, right? Like, the only reason I probably talk about tactics a bit less than I'd love to is I reckon I can take a shortcut. I don't need to. But,
Yeah.
all the podcasts I listen to are all football tactics. That's, my day job, right, is, massively involved in that. So that's the bit I enjoy. I just don't use it as much for FPL
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
think I can take a shortcut, which might be wrong. But I think what's interesting is you say, like, you think you're a different manager to me. I guess maybe on the surface,
Yeah.
but realistically, you said a lot of things I resonate with, right? Which is like
Nice.
trying to remain calm, trying to, template or not template, which, by the way, on Scoutcast last night, Andy was saying there was a comment that accused us of being template, and I was literally there presenting a no Haaland team. So, can't win. But yeah, so I think, like, you're trying to make your own decisions, not play your own game, and make decisions based on what you believe is the best available information. Remain calm, not overreact to certain things. That sounds very familiar to me. Just
Mm.
the method I use is maybe different to your method, but we're trying to play in a similar way. I think we're just using different tools,
Yeah.
and I would promote that to anyone who wants to play FPL.
Yeah, fair, fair, fair. The last thing I'll say on rank is I do agree it's super, super tight. I think rank is not it doesn't matter right now. I mean, I think it was before Salah scored, I was up to inside the 100K, for example, and then as soon as Salah scored, I dropped 500K in rank. So, one haul is the difference between 500,000, for example. So I wouldn't worry too much about rank. I do agree with you there. So moving on, let's talk about fixtures. Maybe I can give sort of a lay of the land to begin with. What we have up here is not sorted by difficulty, because I think sorting by difficulty is a little bit tough. Sometimes it's important to have a reason for having, for example, a 6 game week period, 10 game week period, 15 game week period, 12 game, whatever it may be, right? Why do you have a 10 game week fixture ticker up here is sometimes the questions I ask myself, right? Because if you get rid of the game week 18 blanks, the fixture ticker changes. Maybe, Christmas season comes around and there's like 3 games in a row in 1 week where you have to put into consideration as well. So sometimes it's very difficult, or it's right, you do a fixture ticker from now till the next IB, for example. So what I've done here is sort of put it up in terms of just the team names in alphabetical order, and then kind of discuss the situation with the teams that we want to discuss, not like Luton, unfortunately, and then sort of go from there. So I think the first thing we need to note is definitely about Arsenal. Whether this be for wildcarders in 10 or wildcarders that have already pulled the trigger in game week 8, because Arsenal is a team that we all need to consider by the time game week 10 rolls around, because they're short term, sort of midterm, but also very long term, I would say, if you categorically categorize it into 3 different sections, right? So potentially you could wait till game week 12 because their run from game week 12 to, I believe, let's see, sort of game week 15 is really good, right? So the issue with waiting till game week 12 is that their plum prime fixture is in game week 10 against Sheffield United. So they play Sheffield in game week 10, Burnley in game week 12, Brentford in game week 13. Brentford actually are defensively decent on the XGC chart. However, they've also had very good fixtures from game weeks 1 through 8. So it's very hard for me to read how good their defense is. I think their defense is going to get worse in terms of data. And then they play Wolves in 14 and then Luton right after that. So it's like a really, really good run of fixtures. Then Arsenal sort of cool off a bit with Aston Villa, Brighton, and Liverpool. But make of it as what you want, because still their attack can be very good against Aston Villa, Brighton, and Liverpool, who are all sort of mid-table teams in terms of XGC. Then Arsenal get really, really good once again from game weeks 19 through 24. So if you look at the long perspective from game weeks 10 through 24, not only are they, possibly the second best team in the league, best team in the league, but they also have, great defensive attacking assets, FPL assets, and the fixtures are also a long-term play. It's really, I think, important to notice that you're going to want Arsenal players at some point in time. So that's sort of the questions that I've been asking myself with Arsenal. And the obvious questions is, do you go double defense? Do you go double attack? Who do you go for in defense? Who do you go for in attack? I know Ben White is becoming an option. Is Zinchenko going to be an option? Things like that. So that's what I've made of the Arsenal fixture so far. What do you think about that, Seb?
I think you summed that up very well. So for me, it comes down to not if, but when. And that when is probably 10 or 12. And then who, as you mentioned, do you get? We're probably all getting a midfielder. It's probably Saka, and then it's do we get another or a defender? I like the idea of, say, a Saka and a Gabriel or a Zinchenko. Minutes concerns aside for a second, of course. I think then the other question, which ties into the when, is yes, 10 with Sheffield United at home is that plum fixture, but then from 12 they have a lovely run in a row. In 13 they play Brentford away. Liverpool and City play each other in that week, which means if you are a Haaland Salah team, are you possibly lacking a good captain for probably the only week that we have available on the screen here that week, and therefore should an Arsenal player or could an Arsenal player be your captain? The other fixture that's probably available to us here is Tottenham. They have Aston Villa at home. But the reason I think maybe Son doesn't immediately become the answer to 13 is because I think one of the ways of getting to Saka in 10 or 12 is Son. So there's an interesting intertwined question there where, like, you need to keep an eye on 13 when you make your Arsenal/Spurs decision, because I think that is a week you're going to need a captain that isn't Haaland or Salah.
Okay, very nice. Before we get into the Arsenal discussion, I still want to finish the fixtures, Seb, if you don't mind. So next team I do want to talk about is United, and frustrating, right? Basically, Rashford and Bruno have blanked, I think, 6 or 7 game weeks out of the 8. And as a Bruno owner, I got lucky and had a double-digit haul one game week, being, I think, a 10-pointer, 11-pointer. So that's it. But Bruno's stats are very good. But this is what I would like to sort of summarize in terms of United's fixtures. Sheffield in 9, plum fixture. Bad fixture in 10 versus City. So it's going to be a question mark for wildcarders, because Man United have great fixtures from 11 through 13. They have Fulham, Luton, Everton. And when I look at fixture tickers and sort of break it down, I try to spot at least a run of 3 fixtures that is sort of my borderline, right? I think if you have a run of 2 fixtures and then let's say a bad fixture, good fixture, bad fixture, good fixture, something like this, it's really hard to commit to a players because we don't have unlimited transfers, right? So for me, I like to look at it as a 3-block period, because 3 blocks, having a good player with good fixtures could return at minimum, even though Man United have not returned for us so far. But with that being said, United's long-term fixtures from game weeks 14 through, let's say, 24 isn't particularly great. It's sort of what I just discussed, like blocks of periods of 2 good fixtures, 1 good fixture, a bad fixture type of situation. So even with that fixtures between 11 to 13 being so good for United, my question is, whether it is okay to just hop off these assets, assume that they're going to continue to play the way they're playing, and Bruno and sort of Rashford aren't going to return, and forget about them for the time being until their number 6 gets better, Ten Hag gets a rhythm, and somehow United are turning, find a turning point. So that's kind of the assessment I have. When I get to my wildcard in 10, if I have to make a sacrifice in order to fund like a Son, Saka, and etc., then I'm okay to give up a United asset. But that's the questions I've been asking myself. I'd like to know what you think about United's fixtures.
I mean, like you say, it's never a decision in isolation to sell a player. You have to buy a player, and vice versa, naturally, of course. So it's always a relative decision. I too have Bruno Fernandes. I did lose Rashford on my wild card. I kept Bruno because that Sheffield United fixture, which we have this week,
Nice.
is lovely. If it were another season, we'd probably be talking about a Bruno captaincy here. I entirely understand why we're not, and I'm not suggesting that. But just to illustrate how good that fixture is, last week's fixture was decent. And there is, as you say, 11, 12, 13 look very tasty.
Very
Although, of course,
tasty.
we
Yeah.
may well have sold for an Arsenal player or something by then. For me, though, this I think it's a really interesting intersection of the conversation we had earlier, which is beautifully planned by yourself. That that contrast of FPL and like real life football. I don't think anyone could argue that Man United aren't playing as well as they would like. And there are a lot of ways we can analyse that. And they will include looking at Rashford and Fernandes and going, they are not doing the job that we want them to do. However, in terms of FPL, or at least the way I view FPL, Fernandes is right up there in terms of the numbers he's putting up. And if you don't like numbers, if you want to go XG is nonsense, I hate it, that's not a problem. I think if you watch the matches, you would also take away that Fernandes is creating chances, is getting chances, and that would roughly align with the numbers I'm talking about because that's what they're trying to represent. Now, you may want more from him, and that's entirely fair, and we definitely want more output from him. But in terms of his own individual performance, which is what I'm backing in FPL, I'm not backing Man United, obviously, I'm a Leeds fan. I'm backing Bruno Fernandes because I've picked him. I'm not dissatisfied with that pick. I think he has the numbers, the performance under his belt. He has the pedigree. It's Bruno Fernandes. We know that. And he has the fixtures. The only thing he doesn't have is the points output that I want. Now, don't get me wrong. At some point, you might go, look, there's something I'm not seeing here. It's not turning into points. Time to cut losses. But for me, that would only come when there was another complementary decision, such as a fixture shift or a sensible transfer. I'm not going to bin Fernandes just because he's not doing the points for me. And hey, I kept him on wildcard, so I could have had anyone. I chose to keep him. There is a good chance that he becomes an Arsenal player in the next 1 to 4 weeks for me, especially if I want to keep Son.
Yeah, good. This is a good discussion. So let's bring it back to the general public FPL sort of questions in terms of Man United, because for someone like me who has Bruno and you're a different case, I think, right? So for someone like me who's holding onto a wild card and has Bruno, I have the opportunity to play him in game week 9 against, Sheffield United. Then I can sort of have another opportunity to decide in game week 10 whether I see anything from United, any sort of hope, and it's worth holding on to one. But most people in game wildcard 8 have probably gotten rid of, or even if you didn't wildcard, have probably gotten rid of United assets. You're, I think, a particular case where you kept a United asset on your wildcard. So if you don't have a United asset, with the priority being, let's say, Arsenal and other teams, would you ever consider bringing someone back for game week 9 through 13 with number 10 in mind, game week 10 in mind?
So on my wildcard, I don't have Haaland, which is a big reason I am able to afford Fernandes. So I can have Trippier, I can have Fernandes, I can have a few luxury picks because I don't have the biggest luxury in Haaland. Therefore, it's a different question for me, as you say, to say someone else who either has wildcarded without Fernandes or hasn't used the wildcard yet over this period. I don't know if I'd be looking to bring a Man United player in for, probably not for Sheffield United because then you have Man City. I'm already there, so I'm fine to hold. You can probably find better value for your transfer in those 2 weeks. I mean, for example, Villa have got West Ham and Luton at home, then Forest, then Fulham. There's a Diaby there that is cheaper and probably going to return a similar value proposition. Then in 11, I think the only reason you wouldn't necessarily be looking at Man United, until of course Fernandes scores a hat-trick against Sheffield United and this whole conversation changes, is only because we then think, say, Arsenal, Liverpool, Brighton. We haven't spoken about them yet, but Brighton, they have better medium-term fixtures and probably better players to access those fixtures in terms of price, value, points proposition. That I think there are just higher priorities in our teams.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think first of all, it's not going to kill your rank because their ownerships aren't going to be high, and it's not like the trust is there either. And again, game week 9 has more than United, right? They have so many good plum fixtures. And then by the time game week 10, 11 rolls around, I think our priorities are going to be with the different teams. So maybe they become differentials. And it's nice to own one in game week 9 and assess after that. So there we go with United. Let's move on to Liverpool, another very interesting fixture ticker that we need to discuss. I think they're serious contenders in that team. The question is, are they going to continue to play, such as Darwin? And we would assume so with the form that he's in. Liverpool have Everton, Nottingham Forest, and Luton from game weeks 9 through 11. So even if you're looking for a 1 week punt this week, I think Darwin is on a lot of people's minds. And, Salah is going to be in everyone's team. He has blanked one time this season. Can you believe it or not? And then they have Brentford, which I'm not sure how to assess because their fixtures have been so good. The question becomes sort of what you do with Liverpool between game weeks 12 to 13. It's a little bit iffy, but still, Liverpool can attack against any team. Then they go Fulham, Sheffield, and Crystal Palace from 14 through 16. So the overall assessment from game weeks 9 through 16 is that their fixtures are really good, but they get a very iffy run of fixtures from 17 to 23. So again, if we categorize into short-term, mid-term, and long-term fixtures, I would say from here till game week sort of 16, Liverpool's fixtures are good. Whether you say that's short-term or mid-term is up to you. But in the long term, I think a lot of us are going to start maybe hopping off the Darwins and the Tsimikas and the TAAs and Robos, whoever else. Again, it's hard to identify who to go for in Liverpool besides Salah, right? So that's sort of the fixtures I assessed with Liverpool. They have very, very good fixtures from 9 through 16. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Salah is a given. If you wildcarded, you probably did it in part to get Salah. If you didn't, you may well be looking at that for transfers anyway. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Even if you retain Haaland on a wildcard or with transfers, I think the captaincy is a big question. And I think Salah probably takes it for me. If I owned both, I think I'd be captaining Salah in a fair few of these upcoming weeks. Most notably, we've got 10 right around the corner. Brighton. It's lovely for Haaland. I'm scared of that. And then there's, we mentioned, the 12, 13, 14 period before. So I think the question is then, do you add to that? I've obviously added Darwin, which was a bit of a wildcard luxury. I had a striker spot because of no Haaland. I can spend a bit more. I could also respond to team news. I think we got early Liverpool team news, or at least we had a chance of it last time. So I was able to confirm, Darwin was a safe pick. And then this weekend, for anyone who isn't aware, Liverpool-Everton is the early kickoff. There is a good chance we will get team news. You will probably find out who is playing for Liverpool. There is a risk Darwin won't because travelling for the international break. So maybe hold off there. Myself, I may have to bench him. But a nice little luxury punt to take on the wild card. I think, however, if you aren't wildcarding like me last week, you're maybe looking at the defence. Trent is probably I don't know what his ownership is, but he's probably a surprisingly nice differential considering it's Trent Alexander-Arnold. And if you can't quite get there, Robertson was available, but now looks to be injured. Trent is 8%, my friend. 8%. That could go big. It's a lot of your budget to commit, a no Haaland team would find it a lot easier. And having Trent and Trippier is tough. I chose Trippier. But I think that could be very, very nice for these coming fixtures.
Yeah, I was going to discuss that with you. I don't know. I have an itching that Trent might become a very, very good pick from this 9 through 16 run. But, it comes with a sort of a lot of questions as well, and maybe too much hope, if you know what I mean, Seb. Okay, so let me just run through a couple more teams. So Brighton, has been spoken about a lot. I think their main question is, who do you actually go for with the rotation they're going to have? Is Estupiñán back? Mitoma seems like a safe, straightforward first type of pick situation, but it's really hard to triple up on them with the rotation as well as European fixtures and this and that. Essentially, the point I want to make is they have a great run from 10 through 13. Great run 15-16, again, two game week period, and then solid run 20 to 23. And you could sort of, if you're imagining yourself free hitting in game week 18, maybe you can hop off that one Brighton asset between 17 through 19. So the overall gist I would like to say is that their fixtures long-term, short-term, and mid-term are quite good. So I think having at least one or two players is important. By the time game week 10 comes around and I wildcard, I thought initially that my edge would be Brighton, but the more I sort of deep dive into it, it's like, who do I actually get from that team? So that's sort of the fixture ticker in terms of Brighton, I would say. And then I would talk about Chelsea. Chelsea are a void for now. They need to sort of find their feet, rhythm. They had a good game with Sterling, so maybe they find a rhythm, but their run from 16 to 21 is just absolutely insane, like super, super pure. So just keep in the back of your mind that if Chelsea find a rhythm and form, that from 16 through 21, they might become a serious option in terms of FPL. So that's my assessment with Chelsea. Then we have West Ham, who have great fixtures from 10 through 17, but not so great from 18 through 23. So it might be sort of a short midterm Liverpool type of situation again. Bowen, can you even afford him? I highly doubt it unless you sacrifice another key player. So JWP, guys like that become a option if you want to go for an enabler like JWP over the likes of Diaby, for example, or Mitoma. So I don't think West Ham is that easy to get to in terms of team structure, even though their fixtures are great from 10 through 17. So it would be sort of a big, what's the right word? Big boy play to go against the grain and go for a guy at West Ham. Tottenham, I believe, is a mixed bag, tough one to assess. But the point I want to make about Tottenham quickly is that you just have either Son or Maddo, because I do think that both of them are sort of fixture proof, especially Son, right? They're going to get their attacking chances. Son just needs a few chances to convert. He just scored in the international friendly 90 minutes. He looks confident. I don't think he's going to get 80, 90 minutes, but he'll get at least 75 minutes is my assessment. And, Maddo is just a safe pick to have, but he kind of ticks along. He's not like a hauler, if you know what I mean, and he's more of an assister, whereas Son is like the goal scorer. And personally, I'm just gonna have Son from here on out. I just believe in more than anything, I believe in the player, right? So that's that. And then Man City is the most interesting thing, and I'll sort of lead this to the next topic, which is why a lot of people have hopped off Man City is because they have tough fixtures all the way up to 15, but then 16 plus, you need Haaland back in your team is the point I want to make. So let's get to first thing, Man City. You are obviously off Holland, Seb. So talk to me about what's going on, why you made that decision, and good luck to you, my friend.
Because I love pain mostly. Yeah, I think it was. I'm not going to sit here and say that people on wildcard should or shouldn't do it. I think it was a pretty borderline decision, but for me, that's almost why it was a decision worth making. There is going to be very few opportunities in the next, maybe couple of years even, if everything goes as expected, to go without Haaland. Now, that doesn't mean you have to take that opportunity. But for me, if we expect very roughly, say, Haaland and Salah, with the captaincy taken into account, points potential to be similar over the next couple of game weeks, that's kind of free risk. Now, I guess it's not free because Haaland's EO is so high that I could be very harshly punished. But for me, that feels like, as someone who doesn't usually take too many gambles in FPL, that feels like a nice opportunity to take. And so I did, because I could, because I was on wildcard and because it was there for me. I do not think Haaland does badly over this period. If anything, I think, he could, I think there was 7 goals. I think when we spoke about it on Scoutcast a couple of weeks ago, we looked at that period and I was like, I think he might get 7 goals or something over that period, which is plenty. But the point is, I think Salah and Son combination could maybe just about match that, and then the budget and the rest of my team could outscore a Haaland team. I think my captain will lose to Haaland, but I think my team will beat a Haaland team. And so that's the
Interesting.
That's the gambit. We'll see how it goes. But for not a second am I saying Haaland won't score goals. He will score lots of them. It's not whether he scores if this works or not. It's the team overall score. And I will need a plan to get him back in about game week 14.
I have a tough question for you. Is there an objective way to sort of assess once you get him back whether this plan worked out? I mean, it's really, really hard to figure out mathematically, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, because there's so many
permutations,
unravel, right?
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
just a one decision versus one decision, because they all knock on to other things.
Mm-hmm.
There are tools out there where you can obviously, your what if tool, what if I did this transfer, and follow those threads through. So maybe that's an interesting thing to do. Maybe it's not an interesting thing to do. Like, I don't know if I feel like it'll be fairly obvious if it's gone terribly or gone well. If it's marginal, do I care to know? Just for my own peace of mind. Like, do I want to know if I lost out on 2 points or I won by 2 points? Probably not, really.
Yeah. Agree. Okay, so the chart I have here is by FPL Chase, a good friend of mine on FPL Twitter. I do think that he is not playing this season, but I found it interesting that the whole point of this tweet was Holland's, goal scoring XG has sort of plateaued, but I thought it was a fun chart to show. And just because Sun's included, I wanted to show it. I don't think you guys should make anything of it, or you should make something of it. But again, it's not like this guy's just once in a generation type player, so I wouldn't read too much into it. Oh, whoops. But you have, sorry, 1 second. But you have this chart up here comparing the 3 captaincy options in terms of Son, Salah, and Holland. Would you like to explain this, Seb?
Oh, sure. So we used this on Scoutcast a few weeks ago. Andy presented it, and I am so sorry. I have forgotten who put this together. So please, if Mode ever sees this, please shout them out. Go back, watch Scoutcast from a few weeks ago because someone did a wonderful job. But this is before I wildcarded. You can see there's game weekend 8 in there, which is when I wildcarded. We had a look, and when I guess it kind of illustrates what I was saying a moment ago, where you go, if there was ever an opportunity to go against Haaland, this is it. Because in almost every week where Haaland has a captainable fixture, so do Son or Salah. And in the weeks where you maybe would be looking elsewhere, not only are Son and Salah available, but they have really good fixtures. So, for example, game week 8, we had Arsenal away for Haaland, we had Luton away for Son, who I captained, so I might lose there when Haaland plays Brighton. But Salah, played Brighton and got the points. So I think for anyone who went Salah, that obviously paid out. And for anyone who went Son, I don't think it was a case of necessarily getting that wrong. You look at this and you went, look, I had a good chance of being right. I was wrong, but I had a good chance. And I think that's what we see all the way through this, even up until about, 15? Probably with the exception of that Bournemouth fixture. Brighton is scary, but I've got Salah, Everton. I'm comfortable enough with that. And I've got Salah, Luton as well in the Bournemouth fixture. So not too tough. Haaland might outscore him by a few points, but I think the team can make up for it. And so again, as I said, I think that's why I went for this over this period. It's then about having a plan to get Haaland back. And if you look at how Son's fixtures sort of morph from mostly green to a bit red, it's the Son to an Arsenal player, Fernandes down to someone else, a Darwin up to Haaland, probably Trippier down, is about how I get there over the course of 4 or 5 weeks, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it's too tough to get back to him. It might take a -4 for you, or pre-plan and over 2 weeks. But exactly which game weeks are you trying to? Obviously you have to captain against him every game week. But which game weeks do you see sort of like the advantage that you have over us Haaland captainers? Would you say?
Sure. So obviously on here we've already had game week 8, and Son only outscored him by like a point. But I think if we put aside the outcome and just look at, which is maybe this is what it's nice for, right? We can kind of look at the decision here. I think it's fairly clear that both Salah and Son had nicer fixtures than Haaland in game week 8. I think in 9, because of how Brighton have played this season, it's very scary. Last season they were like the 5th, 4th best defense. So there is precedence for them being a good defense, but yeah, that's pretty scary. But then Son and Salah have Fulham and Everton. I'll be going Salah. And I think that kind of offsets it. That's a nice fixture to have Salah in. In game week 10, on paper, Man United away should be tough, especially if Salah's got Forest at home. That should be lovely. But we've seen what Haaland has done to Man United in the past, and we also know that Man United defensively haven't been good this year. So we'll see about that one. Bournemouth is the scary one. Yeah, Salah's got Luton, but Bournemouth, Haaland could get 6 there. I think then, Brentford Wolves for Salah and Son versus Chelsea away. I think that's nice enough for Salah and Son. Liverpool then home for Haaland. Son has Villa, and we did mention this was the week that Arsenal, Saka would have Brentford. I think that's another week where you can beat Haaland. Then there's Fulham for Salah versus Tottenham at home for Haaland. And then this is where it sort of turns again. You've still got West Ham for Son and Sheffield United for Salah, although of course I may have sold Son by this point. So I'd be comfy enough going Salah, captain against Sheffield United, over Haaland. It's then game week 16 where I think you go, I need Haaland back. Although with a mind that he has a blank in 18. There's a couple of very nice fixtures around that. So you probably get Haaland for 16 and then get more City for 19, I think is the plan.
Yeah, I think I think free hit 18 is going to be, because City is blanking, I think that a lot of us, and their fixtures are from 16 through 24, for example, are good. So the surrounding fixtures, aside from 18, is good. It's unfortunate that it's just one team, but certainly I think we should maybe consider a free hit in game week 18. I'm sure the decision will come as we get closer to it. Now, you've presented your argument for why it's okay to go without Haaland, but I'm going to scare you a little bit, if you don't mind, Seb, because
I suspect the counter argument is just a big picture of Haaland, be like, are you aware this is the player?
No, I think Haaland has not done great in the last, on his standards in the last 2 game weeks, but I think Rodri is a very, very big missing piece, same as KDB. Last 2 games, they lost both without Rodri, such a silly red card. Man City have played 11 games this season, 8 wins and 3 losses. One loss from coming from a cup, and actually all 3 losses are without Rodri. So it just goes to show how important he is as a number 6. And you think about teams that play along, sort of a similar way that Man City does. Let's say Arsenal and Tottenham. They have a Rice, they have a Bissouma who's performing. You look at a Man United where Ten Hag also presses super high, and he needs that Casemiro number 6 to work, and obviously that's not been working. I really think this Rodri role is super, super important to them. He's coming back, and what he does is when they press and create width, like he's able to cut the counter, right? But this season's been different because Rodri also offers attacking output as well, and he's able to sort of move the ball around. Man City are always going to play against low blocks, tough teams, defensively, no space. So they need to pull defenders. And in order to pull defenders, they need to move the ball side to side. And who's the best at that? Rodri. So I'm excited at the prospect of Rodri coming back. And I think it's going to help their attacking output, not only their defense. So maybe that's a word of caution for you in terms of his return.
I think that's entirely fair. I think, interestingly as well, this whole no team can adequately plan for De Bruyne and Rodri to be out. You can have backups, but losing 2 of your 3 best players, probably your 2 best players, is not a thing any team, even despite City's money, can be expected to plan for.
Yeah.
And to add to that, Calvin Phillips was meant to be the
he's not on the
substitute
same level.
or Rodri complement, right?
Yeah.
When De Bruyne was missing, Phillips comes in and takes some of the load off Rodri. So, Phillips can do the spraying of the passes and Rodri can maintain his old role, or he could step further forward or whatever it is. And I think, I'm a Leeds fan. I love Calvin. For whatever reason, it so far has not worked out at City. He's been injured. Yeah. Maybe they slightly miscounted him. Maybe they did not see what they thought they saw in that player. Still believe he's a good player. But the combination of losing Rodri, losing KDB, and not having the backup they thought they had, I think has probably changed how that team functions. Now, let's not be silly. It's still City. They are still the best team in the league, both offensively, probably just, and defensively for sure. But does that also combine to explain why maybe Haaland hasn't put up the points the last few weeks? Perhaps. But then there was also a game where he racked up about, 3.5 XG and scored 1 goal just about. And it would have been over 4 XG if I think it was the Bernardo Silva goal.
But you're arguing
where
for
Haaland
me right
was
now.
that far away from getting on it.
Uh-huh.
Say again, sorry?
You're talking about the game. I can't remember who it was, but where he should have had 4 or 5 goals, right? Right.
So
okay.
I think even then you go because we're sort of going, oh, this is why maybe Man City have underperformed, blah blah blah. All Haaland had to do was get lucky, and we're not even having this conversation. Haaland would have 20 more points, and I would look even more stupid. So I think even with this, trying to explain why City have been poorer, and I think they have, we have to be careful not to go too far and say, look, it's still Haaland, it's still City. Pep will find good solutions. And so I think, to bring this back to, why I don't have Haaland, it's a perfect storm. City not quite destroying the league in the way that they are capable of because reasons. Haaland not having the best fixtures, and Haaland's alternatives having probably the best possible fixtures you could hope for.
Yeah.
All of those things need to be in place for me to go against Haaland. And I think this comes back to are we ever going to get this opportunity again when Haaland is in the Premier League? Probably not.
Yeah. No, totally fair. I mean, totally fair. And in terms of football and FPL, it's 2 separate things, right? Because, again, it's not just not having Haaland. It's who do you have in place of Haaland, which is sort of the situation you're in. But I think that Rodri returning and, they're Man City, right? They're going to turn it around. I feel like, tough fixtures, whatnot, fixture-proof team. They're the best team in the league. And I just feel confident going with Haaland moving forward. I mean, if he had scored, I think the chat is saying West Ham. If he had scored against West Ham, it'd be a different story, for example. So, yeah.
I think a legit win state here for me is breaking even, which sounds stupid, right?
Yeah.
Not for 1 second do I not expect Haaland to score.
Yeah. No, I respect it, though. I respect the decision, and whoever went against Haaland, more power to you guys. So good luck, Seb. I think.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah, I hope it's not going to be bad. Yeah, because I do agree. Your other captaincy options, Salah again has blanked 1 time this season, right? So as long as Haaland doesn't randomly haul against these tougher fixtures, then maybe you can actually even win the race against us. So interesting. Yeah.
We'll see.
Okay, so I have two charts up here. We have underperformers, overperformance. So this one I believe is underperformers. Do you want to sort of explain what we have here, Seb?
Oh, sure, my friend. I will just pull it up for myself here. So we've used this on Scout a few times, so just thought we would share it here. It's something that I quite enjoy looking at, not basing all your decisions on, of course. But first table is our top 10 underperformers in the Scout members area according to XGI. So XGI is expected goals plus expected assists. So how many returns effectively we would expect these players to have based on those numbers. Now, of course, there's an assumption there. If you hate XG, this table isn't for you. But if you think it serves some purpose, it gives us a good guide. It's not definite. You obviously can't score 0.67 of a goal, so that's nonsense. But all it's saying is, say, the likelihood of a player scoring this number of goals is high, and they have or haven't done that. And there's various reasons for that. Something that is sometimes nice is looking at players on this underperformers list. So Enzo is top here with he should, in theory, have returned 3.67 times, and he has returned 0 times. Now, a big part of that is missing a penalty. That counts for a huge amount. And so one very small binary thing can throw this right off, especially in a small sample. So a pinch of salt there. But players I like taking away from this are ones that have actually returned. So your Mbumos, your Rashford, your Fernandez's. So it's not impossible for them to return, of course. And yet they still appear on this list. They've got good underlying numbers. You know, Bruno's second top there with Mbumo first in terms of Mbumo would expect over 6 returns, and he's only returned 4 times. Now 4 returns is brilliant, and yet we still think he could do even more. To me, that suggests quite a tasty FPL asset. With a final caveat being Neil Maupay is on here. So the other thing is this might also just show a bad finisher. And unfortunately, Neil Maupay probably is that. So I would never get excited by someone like that on this list.
Well explained, well explained. And then the second chart, would you consider this as overperformance?
Sure, yeah. So this is the alternative.
Yeah.
The opposite,
By the way,
direct opposite.
Watkins also has only blanked once this season, which is really wild to think
Absolutely.
about.
Watkins is a great example of this as well, actually. So this is the flip side. This is players who are returning more than we would expect. And again, there are some caveats here. First one, Watkins here, he was nowhere near this list until last week because he got 4 returns, a hat-trick and an assist from 1 XGI. He was like 0.8 XG and 0.2 XA or something. So one fixture saw him go from probably, if my maths is correct, actually being closer to the other list to now being on this list, which shows how very volatile this can be. So we do need to be a little bit careful, especially over small samples. But what this might tell us is that someone like, you'll excuse me for shouting out Han Kui-chan here, but in the past we've seen, he's overperformed in the past as well.
Yep.
And so then we have to make an assessment. Is he getting lucky or is he a good finisher? And I think you can argue either way. If Son appears on this list,
He's a great
Haaland
finisher,
appears on
by
this
the way.
list, there we go then. So if Son or Haaland appear on this list, look, we know they are good finishers. We would expect them to appear on this list because what XG does is it tells us what an average finisher would do. It takes thousands and thousands of shots from players at this level, Premier League level, and says the average player would be expected to score, 0.2 times from this chance. But Erling Haaland is not an average player. We would expect him to overperform, which is why, it's not unrealistic to expect him to overperform. It would in fact be expected for Haaland, and we can take that into our consideration. So if you see someone like Haaland, Son, Harry Kane, Han Ki-chan on this list, it's not a red flag. The players it might be a red flag for is someone like, say, Mateta, who is 0.7 XGI and has 3 assists.
Yeah.
Now, we know assists are volatile anyway because you're relying on someone else finishing your pass. But what that tells me is that he is not going to continue to return at that rate unless he improves his underlying numbers.
Yeah, very, very well explained. I think it's pretty clear cut and sort of a good explanation for those that might be not familiar with how to assess underperformers, overperformers. And you know what, the Watkins thing, again, this is what we discussed earlier on the show where sometimes I use these stats to confirm what I've been thinking. And when I had Watkins in game week 1, I told myself I need to be patient with Watkins because he's going to tick along. He's going to find this patch of form and hopefully return a bunch in like a 2 or 3 game span. This happened to be in one game where I think he scored, 20 plus points. And yeah, and I hopped off him too early and I missed on sort of his big returns, but he's also just blanked 1 time. So it just goes to show what kind of character or what kind of FPL asset he is and the type of player you want to have in your team. just on this note, I'd like to ask everybody to, please like and subscribe to the show today. I need to do a quick plug. We still have 30% discount memberships for anybody that might not have joined. And if you listen long enough to both of us, I have a very, very interesting punt that I'm going to bring in this game week, and very different from possibly everybody else. So I'm excited to sort of reveal that at the end and explain why I'm there. But thank you for explaining these two charts, Seb.
No problem.
And before we get to our bus team, the last teams I would like to discuss is Liverpool and Arsenal. So we don't have any specific charts to explain these two teams, but I want to know what you think about Salah and Co. and if there is another alternative option to go for, maybe as a punt in Game Week 9, and as we discussed from 9 to 16, great fixtures. So what's your assessment of the Liverpool FPL assets?
Sure. So I think from an FPL sense, we're going to get a gift probably this weekend, which is knowing that lineup. I think if you have the capability, either a wild card or available transfers, someone like a Darwin, if they start, is a very nice pick. Salah's a given. I think you probably need Salah soon, or a plan to not have Salah. You need to know what you're doing with captaincy and whatnot. And then the defense, as we mentioned earlier, is another option. But without wildcards, I don't know if you go for the defense yet, because there's probably, we've not really mentioned, we mentioned Watkins, but Villa, Diaby as well. West Ham, you spoke about briefly. I think West Ham, Soufal would probably be my favourite pick for my team personally.
Yeah.
For West Ham, although Bowen's up there, but I may prefer like a Diaby for the midfield. And then Brighton, trying to get in on them, a Mitoma, maybe the defence. When we were looking at their fixtures, despite the rotation, I think the nice thing about Brighton's good fixtures, which are very, very good, is there's a lot of poor attacks in there. So while Brighton's defence has been poor, I like the idea of holding a Brighton defender, say Estupinan, even though I may not do myself in my own team, alongside, say, I think maybe Mitoma is the best option there, because best minutes, and even if he isn't getting the minutes, we've seen that the involvement from the bench could work out for a kind price. It's a bit like the old budget City. You don't know when they're going to play, but when they play, they're going to get points.
Yeah. I like how you're pronouncing Mitoma, by the way.
Oh, thanks. I hope that's close.
I don't know. I mean, I'm from East Asia, but I'm not obviously Japanese.
Oh goodness,
so,
I should definitely. I will follow your lead, my friend. I always. I never attach too much preciousness to the pronunciations of players' names, because
no, but it's sort of a sign of respect, right? And it's
I think trying.
Yeah.
Like if you're able to try, give it a go, but also don't slate anyone for getting it wrong, right? That feels okay to me.
Yeah. So I just to bounce off your thoughts, I also think that it's very hard to get to a Liverpool defender. Besides, we all want Trent, but for me, like for like, I think Trippier can match Trent, and I just don't think 1 million in defense is a lot of money, right? So I just don't think it's worth it. But it's a different story for you without Holland, obviously, and so defense, it doesn't interest me so much. But I'm looking at that second asset and who that can be, and it has to be Darwin on a lot of our radars, right? I'm not sure what the situation with Jota is in terms of injury, but it seems like it's Diaz, Salah, and Darwin up there, and it's like when we think of Liverpool, Seb, we always think about this sort of heavy metal football that people talk about, but it's a different type of heavy metal football for me, because what they do is sort of have a very tight box rectangle in the middle of the pitch. They don't really, counter from the back, from the defense all the way to the top. So what I mean by this is they try to steal the ball with their three midfielders, McAllister, Szoboszlai, and Curtis Jones, for example, and then your three attackers really run up the pitch, and it's gun-ho heavy metal from there. So it's like a very patient sort of gegenpressing, if you know what I mean. It's like different from the 4, 5, 6 years ago, and that's why I'm excited at the prospect of Darwin, because as soon as they get the counter, they're going to try to feed Salah, because he's the quickest to run that right side, and then it's Darwin finding these sort of open spaces where Salah can feed him as well, and Diaz is making these crazy runs as well, and they have that midfield to back up those three attackers. It's very hard to explain what I'm trying to visualize and show you guys, but it's just a very exciting sort of way that I've seen them play this season, and I think I'm going to do everything I can to sort of have Darwin in my team in Game Week 10, because the explosiveness is there, and he can really haul any game. Yeah.
I mean, it's heavy metal football, but heavy metal football 10 years ago. You know, you're a bit older now, you're a bit more refined, you can't stay up as late. So it's heavy metal to a point. And I think what we've seen is, you know, we saw that Trent inversion as an attempt to solve some of the defensive problems. I would argue that's, from a tactical point of view, that's not even that necessary anymore because of the midfield recruits. And that's really what it's come down to. You know, Liverpool, they were based on, firstly, they were based on having 11 players available every week. You know, Salah, Mane, Firmino, the midfield were always available, could always carry out this football, which is a feat medically for the club as well as tactically, which is a big part of it that, you know, we often don't talk about when you're running a football club. I think when those players, your Fabinho, Henderson, Wijnaldum, who physical specimens and of course technically good enough to carry out that football, when they got past their best, Liverpool's football had to change, and they maybe struggled to find solutions there. They maybe didn't quite recruit well enough. You know, Thiago, not quite, because of injuries potentially, not quite the player they needed. Maybe they've started to solve that now with Szoboszlai, McAllister, but not in the same way. You know, they have not signed the next Jordan Henderson. And as you say, that box there with trends inverting, they are looking for a different solution to the same problem, because the front three is kind of still the idea of, you know, a Salah and various foils to Salah, especially when Diaz is playing. And I think Darwin obviously doesn't do that Firmino role, but what has changed in his football, and I take this from someone else who analysed, I listened to a Liverpool podcast, and they pointed this out, not myself. I think it was the Anfield Wrap, if anyone wants to look. That the thing that's changed in his game over the last season is nothing to do with his attack, but his ability to press and form a capable part of that pressing structure, which is maybe why he is preferred in the Premier League. We think maybe that's not certain over the Champions League, where Hakpo has been playing, we think, and why he may continue getting the minutes in the league. Now, of course, you know, defensive-wise, we don't really care in FPL what a forward does, but if he's in the team, we also know that he is, per 90, Haaland levels of getting chances. He's not as good a finisher. But if he gets those chances and he's in the team, I would like myself some of that.
Yeah. It's good. It's music to my ears that you've noticed the same thing. I think they're playing a different way, and it's obviously working this season. So exciting to see the changes at Liverpool. Very Darwin heavy interested. I think it's a team structure thing. Whether I can get to him in Game Week 10 wildcard, we'll see. Especially because someone like me, I really want Son. And I think in the chat, let me shout him out. I believe Rahul asked me to present a couple of drafts next week, so we will get to that next week. Unfortunately, I don't have a Wildcard 9 draft ready for you guys. I would like to shout out a couple people in the chat. Gee-whiz, thank you so much for your aggressiveness in getting the likes up. Guys, do hit the like button if you can. I see some familiar faces. Violet Citizen, good to see you. Alex, good to see you. Thank you guys for joining us today. Last team before we get to bust teams, Arsenal. Defense, attack, or maybe you can just shout out your top 3 picks sort of situation in terms of FPL.
Sure. So I think, Saka, fairly straightforward. Probably the best pick from Arsenal, even with a lower chance of penalties. I think the case with him is he is the default penalty taker, but default is a very light term compared to when, say, Bruno Fernandes is the default penalty taker. It appears that Saka will probably take the first penalty in any match in which the penalty matters, unless he doesn't fancy it and Ødegaard does, which is a hell of a caveat. So we've seen him take penalties when game state is even and when he hasn't scored a goal. We've seen him give away penalties when game state isn't even and he has already scored a goal. He did that twice, was it 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And we've also seen Ødegaard take one when game state was even, but for reasons...
So frustrating as a Saka owner, Seb. So frustrating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you were to line up Arsenal players in their probability of taking a penalty, Saka would still be top.
Yeah.
So even if it's much lower than we'd like, he is still top. So I think you have to give that to his credit. What it does mean is that Ødegaard is probably quite a close second, and then Martinelli's in there as well. For me, I probably don't go double midfield. I would like some of that defence. Now, I have David Raya. So, one of the things I like about my wildcard is that Raya-Johnston combination. I think I lucked into a good little rotation there. It's expensive, but it works. We'll talk about that in a second when we look at teams. But if you aren't wildcarding, you don't have the goalkeeper. I think Gabriel, Zinchenko, White, Saliba are all options. Now, I like Gabriel because of his threat from corners.
Yeah.
But we do have to acknowledge that his X-Mins are down. Now, I think early on in the season, we were talking about early season tactical analysis. On Scoutcast, we looked at why Gabriel wasn't playing. Now, the assumption...
I think it was because of Havertz, right?
No,
sorry to cut you off.
So sort of. So, the midfield build-up has changed because of Havertz and sort of shifted that left-hand side mechanic. But And this was taken from a podcast called Pot Shots, which is a brilliant Arsenal podcast. If anyone wants to go listen to that, they shouted this over the summer, and it took me several weeks to catch up. So I wish I had caught up earlier. But the idea is that Zinchenko last season was inverting from the left, which means in possession, the rest of the Arsenal defence are forming a back three. Gabriel left centre back, Saliba centre back, Ben White right centre back. Now, with Zinchenko injured, they couldn't invert Zinchenko at the beginning of the season, so they were inverting Partey from the right instead. That meant that because of how the defence would then have to shift, we did have a graphic on this as well, so if anyone wants to visualise that, go back a few weeks, but I'll try and explain now. Gabriel was no longer left centre-back, he was centre-back, and Saliba was obviously in a different position. And Arteta, the assumption is, did not want this. He did not want Gabriel as centre-back. He wants him as a left centre-back or not in the team. And so he chose not in the team. He dropped him so that he could maintain the structure he wanted in that back three with an inverting fullback shape. Now, the proposal here was that when Zinchenko returns to the team, so will Gabriel, and he will become as nailed as Zinchenko is, because the structure can be maintained. The problem is that Partey got injured. Partey didn't get dropped, and Zinchenko didn't become fit and regain his place. So when Partey is fit again, we don't know what's going to happen. But as long as Zinchenko is in the team, I think the proposition holds that Gabriel's place is safe. So for me, because as well of the threat he brings from corners, which is massive, by the way, he often racks up about 5 XG a season, which is huge for a centre-back. I like Gabriel, but massive caveats there, of course. The minutes aren't certain. So if you want some safety, I think Ben White is there for you. But I do like the idea of the Arsenal defence. And I'm sure you may cover this as well. Team structure-wise, we know they haven't been as good defensively, but it's a bit like City. They are still up there, and with kind fixtures, I think it's enough.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Your knowledge is abundant, and it's always interesting listening to you. Again, back to FPL, I think that it's easier to have or accommodate 2 Arsenal defenders than it is to have 2 Arsenal mids. Also, who is that second mid? Odegaard doesn't give me excitement. I'd rather have guys like Martinelli. So maybe that's the reason why you can hold off till game week 12 and ignore the game week 10 fixture before you can really assess who you want. Jesus comes back into the picture as well as a striker option. The one thing I will say about going Arsenal attack over Arsenal defense, Seb, is that in the first 8 game weeks, they haven't really played, or they've played tougher fixtures in general, or not tougher fixtures, but they haven't played like the bottom XGC teams, right? The bottom XG, like bottom 6 XGC teams. Whereas from here till I think around game 16, 17, they're going to play 4 or 5 of those. So I think there's going to be more goals than we expect, which is why the attack also interests me. And Martinelli is just so explosive, right? And maybe that's the reason why you decide to really forego the defense. But team structure-wise, no doubt about it, accommodating 2 Arsenal defenders is way easier than to have 2 attacking assets.
Yeah, I think you'd probably need to fall out of love with Spurs. Maybe you were looking for a replacement for Son and Maddison.
Yeah.
And you could think, Saka and Odegaard, maybe a Man United player as well. But like you say, structure probably dictates how we build our Arsenal team.
Yeah. Fair. Okay, so we've passed the hour mark. Let's get to buzz teams. I'd like to do your team first, Seb.
Sure.
So please read out your team for the podcast listeners and then sort of tell me what you're thinking. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'll go through the team and then I will explain why it's not as terrible as it looks. Johnston in goal, Trippier, Dalot and Pedro Porro at the back, Bruno Fernandes and Mbumo, Salah captain, Son vice captain and Maddison in the midfield. I do like that midfield. It looks tasty. So 2 points all round. And then Darwin and Watkins up front. The bench is David Raya, Cash, Byrne and Archer. Archer is obviously my facilitator. I did toy with the idea on wildcard of going with 3 forwards, so that probably would have been an Alvarez. But I think Alvarez is different to Haaland because he's half the price. There's a massive value proposition there. But for me, the logic was, look, if I'm not backing Haaland to be a amazing pick over this period, why would I go for the lesser version in Alvarez? Yes, it saves me a bunch of money, but with Darwin quite similarly priced, can I actually steal even more there? Have Archer on the bench, put the money into, say, a Fernandes or a Trippier, which is kind of really where I think I've put that Haaland money.
Yeah.
The main decision for me this week then would be Cash, Byrne, Dalot, probably 3 players for 1 spot because I think Trippier and Porro have to play. And the goalkeeper. I've got Johnston at the moment and Raya's on the bench. I could switch that. In fact, I think I'm more likely to switch that than the defenders. And I mentioned I would just talk about Johnston and Raya. I think on wildcard, I happen across the idea of Raya Johnston rotation. What I was looking for is, can I get Raya in my? Can I gamble that he's actually more first choice than Arteta thinks he is? But can I also cover myself if I get that wrong? So I needed someone who rotated well with Raya. Off the top of my head, options were Turner, whose place could also be at risk at some point, so I didn't quite like that, and Areola, I think. Now, in the weeks that I knew I would need a Raya replacement, even if he's first choice, was probably this week Chelsea, so not perfect with Newcastle. But then I also had last week, where obviously Raya did actually keep a clean sheet, but Johnson outscored him because of bonus, so that worked out nicely. And then for anyone who does go Raya, an important caveat is he is on loan. He cannot play Brentford in game week, I think it's 13. So you need someone who can play in 13. And Johnston in that week has Luton away. So I was very happy to go Johnston as my Raya backup. Also, plays for a good defence, has decent fixtures, and I think Henderson unfortunately is out for a bit of time, so was a pretty nailed on choice. So even if Raya got dropped completely for Ramsdale, I have a goalkeeper in there. So I was pretty happy with that. So the decision this week is just who to play. Then I think they pick themselves. And then, yeah, the defence is the other decision. For me, captaincy, easy. Salah, captain. Son vice, because I have no Haaland.
It is amazing you have Ryan Johnson. I didn't realize you had in this. I mean, this is the first time I'm seeing your team, by the way, Seb. And
okay.
Yeah, I love that Raya pick. I think he might come in super, super handy. Maybe I would even start him this week over Johnston because Newcastle definitely have a chance to score, right?
Yeah. I think I'm closer to starting Raya than I am like Cash or Burn over Dallo. Now, don't get me wrong, I could change all of those. But yeah, on Scoutcast last night, I think chat pointed that one out to me.
Yeah.
And it's my bias not catching up to Newcastle. I see Newcastle and I go, oh, that's fine. Actually, it's not. Arsenal's defense is probably good enough to keep Chelsea out. Maybe I do go David Raya.
I think so. I think you have to. I mean, I'm super high up on Newcastle. They're because a Trippier owner, you have the bias, and they're definitely going to score. I believe, right? So, yeah, maybe something to consider. I don't like the fact that you have Cash first on the bench because.
Would you play him over Dallo?
Yeah, it's tough because I think that I'm not going to answer that. I don't know the answer to that. I just think that West Ham are, in terms of data, they're not the best XGC wise, right? They're actually one of the.
They've had very tough fixtures, though.
They've had very tough fixtures,
I think if you normalize for fixtures, they look better than you would expect. I think.
Okay, then I don't want to sway you from that decision because I think it's a tough one. But do you feel confidence that they're going to keep a clean sheet against Sheffield, Man United?
Oh, so yes. When I say confident, right? Outcomes are binary, decisions are percentage probability wise. So I don't know, I'll give you like a 60% chance, which is good enough for me, right?
Yeah.
However, Cash is, maybe like a 55% chance, given he also, could get a better chance of attacking returns, although he is much lower on the minutes. So sure, he could be subbed with a clean sheet that is then lost, but he also could miss the final 20 minutes of a match in which I want some points. So at the moment, I'm edging Dallo, but if anyone has the same team as me and plays Cash, I respect that.
Yeah,
I think it's very close.
Yeah. Nice, beautiful team. Good luck to you this week. We'll get to my team next.
Me. I'll need it. Just pretend that Man City don't play, right?
Yeah, you should be fine. Maybe. Okay, so I have Turner in goal. I am playing a 3-5-2. Udogi, Trippier, Schär in the defense. In the midfield, I've got Madison, Mbuemo, Bruno Fernandes, Sterling, Son. Up top, I've got Alvarez and Holland. And when I looked at my pick team on the Button app last week after Game Week 8 commenced, I was drooling over this game week because I think this team looks spectacular on paper, right? The missing hole I would say here is Sterling. So as much as I can get to Darwin this game week, I have money in the bank. I just don't think it's worth losing Alvarez against Brighton. Brighton, I don't think are such a bad defensive team that people make it out to be. I think they're sort of a middling in terms of defensive stats and, a mixed bag. Sometimes you can get 5 goals against them. Sometimes they lock you out type of situation. So I just don't think that change is worth it because I don't see Darwin maybe outscoring Alvarez by 1 goal, but not so much by 2 or 3 goals. So it's the Sterling one that I'm considering changing. And Arsenal, I do think at home is going to be a tough fixture regardless. And so I was assessing who do I get to from Sterling. Moving up, there are not that many options. Maybe Rashford. And on this note, maybe we can talk about some plum game week 9 fixtures. Man United play Sheffield, Newcastle play Crystal Palace, Liverpool play Everton, Tottenham play Fulham, Wolves play Bournemouth, and Man City play Brighton. So here's where I'm at, Seb. I think I'm going to go Sterling to Hwang Hee-chan because Hwang is third in terms, because the caveat being I have a wildcard 10 in my back pocket, right? Hwang is third in the Premier League in terms of goals scored so far this season, after Son 2 and Holland first. 2 Koreans up there in the top 3, by the way. And he's been on a tear. Last year he had a tough season. He was injured pretty much the entire season. He just scored today again, like 2 assists, 1 goal. He's the best finisher in the league this season so far. This is I can't remember exact what stat defines it, but he, like you said, he doesn't get a lot of chances because it is Wolves. But when he does get the chances, he's able to convert. And it's a thing about just like the feeling that I have with him is that his confidence is super, super high. I'm not advising anybody to go for this pick, but I'm sort of thinking about it in the back of my mind. I'm like 90% there, 80% there, I would say. Wolves play a very interesting way of football, right? And what they basically do is sort of give the ball out to Neto. And Neto, I think, has blinked maybe once or twice this season. So Neto is the obvious pick that people think. But Neto's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, right? He's like destroying defenses on the right. He's like dribbling past everybody, making everything happen. And then feeding the channels inside where Hwang has the space to move from the left inside to the box, because Neto is pulling defenders to the right. So yeah, I'm excited about this pick. I like how it's a 1 week punt, and he's been scoring nonstop, and he just scored today as well. And yeah, I think I'm going to go for it. I think I'm thinking about doing Sterling to Hwang Hee-chan.
Hey, man, it's a marriage of, a personal preference and actually some, actual proper justification. So yeah, do it, friend. I think I'm less high on him than you. I maybe would go Neto if I was looking at Wolves.
Yeah.
But then you've just explained your thinking there. So you've looked into this more deeply than me. I massively respect that. And I think the caveat is you've got this wildcard 10, right? So it's not I'm picking Hwang and then I need 5 weeks of returns, right? You can pinpoint this fixture and try and get some returns from it and then reassess on wildcard, which I think is very fair.
Yeah. We'll see where I end up. One of the reasons why I find this pick to be fun is that there's no specific clear standout player to go for in terms of a fun punt. And yeah, maybe the obvious ones, right? You could go, I don't know, Diaby or Rashford or guys from better teams with good fixtures, or there's a Man City midfielder that arises, or maybe even a Liverpool midfielder that arises. So I'm keeping my options open, but potentially I will end up on Hwang Hee-chan this week.
Allow me to offer you an alternative.
Please
I know
do.
You won't pick, but just for balance. So I think actually quite nicely, I looked at this beforehand. This fits very much with what you're trying to do with Hwang Hee-chan there, is Morgan Gibbs-White. So again, a 1 week punt before you wildcard, has Luton, is a penalty taker, I think has very good X minutes, with the exception of was potentially injured the other week and so was on the bench, but generally has good minutes there. And of course, it isn't the obvious, if we know Darwin is starting, if we know Luis Diaz is starting, I think those are right there for you. So those are obvious. But if we don't get that information, or if they aren't starting, and you've already got your Fernandezes or your Sons or your City attack, if that's what you want, whatever, I think an enabler there to allow you to either move any player out of your team, so a cheaper player, or to enable a double transfer before a wild card and maybe target, grab that Fernandez or grab that Son, grab that Haaland for 1 week before you transfer them out. I think Morgan Gibbs-White allows that in that midfield slot that you've got there. So he would be my 1 week punt on a budget.
No, I appreciate it. For the listeners, Seb's 1 week punt was Morgan Gibbs-White. Not for me, but yeah.
You're so kind.
I appreciate
Seb's
it.
Terrible shot. Get Hwang.
Yeah, and I also think these are the few game weeks out of the year where you can really have fun, especially before a wild card. So I'm trying to get the sort of FOMO fear out of this decision making, because I think there's decent reasoning behind it as well as a good gut feeling about it. So let's see how this game week turns out. Guys, please do hit the like button before you go. I really appreciate you guys. 1 hour 15 minutes. It's always a lovely time chatting to Seb. shout out to the Scoutcast boys. Hopefully we can get Andy and Flapjack on as well. I honestly want to do it with Pras as well, but it's just difficult time-wise in terms of him having the lunchtime and then he has to go to work. Because I live in Korea, it's a different time slot, but I'm sure we'll get him back soon. And we'll have Harry back next week for my wildcard 10 and for a lot of people who are wildcarding in Game Week 10. So it was nice to get back into the rhythm, sort of talk to you about FPL football. And good to see you, Seb. Any last words for you?
Any last words? Oh gosh, that's very apt as a non-Haaland owner, right? Any last words, you fool? Thank you so much for having me, my friend. Thank you for asking me to fill in for my betters in Harry and Praz in the past. So I always enjoy talking to you. I think bring it back to the beginning, right? I think we have very similar mindsets, but potentially different interests in how we like to approach FPL. And so I adore talking to you about it.
I appreciate it.
Could do it all day.
Yeah. I think the first time I ever streamed was potentially it was Scoutcast before Burning Question. Maybe it was like when Burning Questions first started. So I always have that memory deep down inside me. Sai asked a very, very good question, actually. If we are going to go long-term, Sterling to long-term hold, is Diaby any good, or would you get Bowen, Diaz, Jota? If you've been listening throughout the podcast, we sort of explained all the fixture situations with the different teams. Yeah, I think Diaby is a very, very good enabler and probably the standout pick to go for, potentially Mitoma as well. I can't think of anybody else at that price point, but yeah, I think Diaby is a very safe pick to go for. Would you say so?
One word answer, Diaby in that slot for me.
Yeah, nice.
That was more than one word.
Nice. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you guys again, and we will see you next week, and have a great rest of the week.